Hey there, and thanks for clicking with us on Vernal Television's website, vernal.tv. As part of a series of rural business conferences in Utah, Senator Bob Bennett held one in Roosevelt and presented information about, among other things, small business. Stay tuned to watch VTV's exclusive interview with the Utah Senator.
Well, once again, welcome to northeastern Utah.
Yes, delighted to be here.
How do you feel when you come to this part of the state?
Well, I'm always impressed by how much change has gone on. Every time you come out here, there's a little more growth, a little more activity. It's a very vital part of the state. I'm delighted to be here. When I went to Congress the first time, we were in the minority. There was a Democratic president and a Democratic House and Senate, and a lot of excitement about change in the country. Does that sound familiar? We're going through much the same cycle right now. People find out that governing is more difficult than campaigning, and President Obama is discovering that, just as President Clinton did. And it takes a little while for a new administration to settle down and focus more on governing than going through the motions of campaigning. So we have that cycle to get through. Generally, I think the attitude in Washington is one long-term, one of optimism. America is still the strongest and most resilient economy in the world. But short-term, yeah, there's probably more concern, more fear now than there was back in '93.
Talk about, if you would, this Healthy Americans Act that you're trying to
Yes.
Sum that up in just as quickly as you can. What is that all about?
Well, there are two grand bargains that have been made. That is, Democrats moving towards Republican, Republican moving toward Democrat. The Republican move is a recognition that if we're going to have health care that makes sense in this country, everyone ought to have some kind of health care coverage. And Republicans have always resisted the idea of, quote, universal coverage. That's the slogan the Democrats have been behind, because they've taken it as a code name for a single-payer government-run system like you have in the United Kingdom or Canada or some other countries. Republicans have always resisted that. We have to recognize that we have de facto universal coverage now. It's just done on the most inefficient, most expensive way to do it. Because we're a compassionate people, the law says if you show up in an emergency room and you have a problem, they will treat you whether you have the ability to pay or not. So that is a form of universal coverage. But the cost of that then gets shifted to everybody else, and in the most inefficient way. So Republicans in the health excuse me, Republicans in the Healthy Americans Act are saying, all right, we're willing to accept the idea that everybody ought to have health coverage. Democrats, on the other hand, have to accept the idea that the best way to deliver it and the best way to pay for it is not through a government-run system. It's through private private market-based forces. So the Republicans say, okay, we will agree that everybody ought to be covered. Democrats say, we will agree that it ought to be through private initiative and market-based forces. And on those, the convergence of those two principles, we have the basis of the Healthy Americans Act. Well, it is a message of optimism, and it's a statement at the same time that while optimism is essential, optimism alone is not enough. There needs to be some experience, there needs to be some intelligent planning, there needs to be some understanding of the process. So we're trying with the various breakout sessions to give them information they can really use. Tips, if you will, but sometimes it's more than tips. An understanding of the way the system is structured so that they can say, oh, maybe I'm going in the wrong direction with this particular view I have of the marketplace. Maybe I hadn't understood how I could use the web better. Maybe I hadn't understood how certain marketing programs can go forward. Now I've learned something that I can take with me. That's the thing we hope that we give them as a result of these conferences. Well, I didn't grow up in rural Utah. I grew up in Salt Lake City, and I graduated from the University of Utah, and I was a Wasatch Front guy all of that time and built my business on the Wasatch Front. But when I became a senator, I realized I had to be the senator for the whole state. I couldn't just be a senator for the part that I felt comfortable in or where I had lived. And as I got out into rural Utah, I discovered very real needs. I remember when I was campaigning, someone said to me, "Senator, one thing we need in rural Utah most of all is jobs. Yet all we get from the federal government are federal jobs. Now, what can you do to help us get jobs that are not just federal jobs?" This isn't running down the people that work for the Forest Service or the BLM or the other Park Service, the other federal jobs that are available. But it is a balance that rural Utah needs. And so I decided, well, if that's the kind of thing you need and I'm going to be the senator for the whole state, that's the kind of thing I'm going to have to work on too. Well, obviously they can patronize local businesses, which more and more of them do, but one of the things that I'm encouraged about as I deal with this question is the amount of education that is being made available right here on this campus, Utah State University. Not very many years that they've been here. This is a new experience, and it's one thing to leave high school and get a job driving a water truck at a really good wage when the oil patch is booming, and say, well, this is all I need. It's another thing to realize, wait a minute, there's a swing that occurs. It will occur again. Maybe driving a water truck is not what I want to do the rest of my life. Maybe I ought to get some more education, and now it's available here. So encouraging people to think about staying in rural Utah with the kinds of careers that you can enjoy, now that the days of staying in rural Utah in agriculture seem to be fading. There are other opportunities here. There are other things you can do. And parents should encourage their kids to get as much education as they can, focus on learning the business circumstances best they can, so that they can create their own jobs in rural Utah and they don't have to depend on people like me to do what we can to help them out. Well, getting broadband into remote communities is a very important part of the effort that has to go on. There are some things that we can do in the government and that I'm supporting we can do in the government, but there are also things that the locals should do and reach out to those companies that are involved. We have initiatives coming out, Comcast and Quest and others that are concerned about how do we expand our services, and local people should call on those companies and say, this is what we're interested in. This is what we could provide for you. These are the kinds of customers we have. And then if those are not available, then come to us and say, well, what kind of government things? Take the initiative locally. Don't just wait for somebody to come to you. Well, America generally, and Utah in particularly, is still growing. You look around the world, Europe is no longer growing. European countries are shrinking in population. Japan is the second largest national economy in the world, and Japan demographically is stagnant. They're not having children, they don't have immigration, their population is not growing. Utah is the fastest growing state in terms of family size, or family formation in the Union. There's some other states that may be ahead of us because of inward immigration, but Utah is the state where the family still is very, very strong. Birth rate is highest in the nation, and that means properly managed economic growth and economic opportunity. I would not want to live in a place where the demographics were stagnant and going the other way. So Utah, hang on to your optimism, recognize your opportunities, and keep driving forward.
Thank you for your time. It's been great to visit with you.
My pleasure.